October. That's Friday, a couple weeks. And then the voting will happen that next week. And we'll figure out a t-shirt for our program. And the winner will get some kind of prize.
T-shirt.
Something else.
Are we doing cotton like t-shirts or are we doing like the exercise tech shirts?
The cotton ones are the cheapest. But I mean, maybe, yeah. Annie has an announcement.
Yeah. Okay. Guess I'll come up here so people can see me. Hopefully you all saw the email, but I'm gonna be hosting an event for the women of IP&T on October 25th. We're gonna be doing a My Favorite Things event. So it just means that you're gonna bring 3 items that you love that are related to fall, and then we're gonna exchange them at my parents' home. We're gonna have some really yummy food and there'll just be some activities. I just would love to get to know all of your beautiful faces a bit better. So I sent out an email. There's a RSVP just because we need to know how many people to prepare food for. So if you would like to come, please come, first of all. But if you'd like to come, make sure you fill out the RSVP. Any questions on that?
That's awesome.
If men are feeling left out, someone can host a men's activity.
Sorry, man.
Zero details, zero planning. Bring your own means.
Let me just give this idea. Pull weeds.
Hey, yes.
Pull televisions in this room. There's a major event in March. Which watching things on multiple televisions might be really fun. Pizza.
You're secretly invited to that. That's where I drink.
That's a gender. No, it's just kidding.
Awesome. I love that idea. Thank you both. That'll be awesome.
I'm not kidding. We should do that.
We should do that. It's a great idea. Like, Jules Green should have like 8 games going on. Okay, super. Very glad to have Dr. West and his team talking to us today about their trip. Actually, not just the trip, but the whole evaluation progress. It's not about the trip. It's about the whole project, and it did include an exploration trip. But thanks for your time and jump on in.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, so hopefully everyone knows me. I'm a faculty here in the program, but I teach a lot of times in the undergrad minor that we have. And I know we've got 3 of our students here that you may not know also. They're PhD students. They're a little bit more advanced. Well, except for Lily, you know really well. But anyway, they're here too. And so you'll get to know them as they talk about this experience as well. So we are going to talk, but we're not going to try to just tell you what we did this last summer. This isn't going to be a vacation sharing experience. What we want to do is talk about pedagogy, which is why this seminar is here. We're going to be talking about project-based learning and why this strategy might be an effective way of learning. And what we did is we went through a project-based learning kind of experience. So talk about that. Overview first. This is what we're going to do today. We're going to overview experiential learning and project-based learning as a type of experiential learning. You probably have heard the words, but maybe don't know how it fits in with other types of experiential learning, for example. So we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about lessons we learned from doing experiential learning in this BYU Pathway project that we did. So first, I want to set this up by saying that society is changing and the way we learned in the past can't be the way that we learn in the future or teach in the future. It just won't work because society is not the same as it was even 10 years ago, and it's changing rapidly. Some of the things that are changing is people are wanting more experiences. They're wanting to be skill-based rather than time-based in their learning. They're wanting lifelong learning. They're wanting all these kinds of things. And this makes me think, in an era of AI, for one thing, and in an era of online education, why will people still come to the university? And maybe I'll just throw that out there for real quick. We don't have a lot of time for feedback, but a couple thoughts. Why would people still come to a university in an era of online, AI, all that kind of stuff? It's easy to get stuff on the internet.
Yeah, because like for me, well, the reason why I came to the US because it's not only like I want to learn some knowledge from the textbook, but also like the cultures, how like just see how different the other world is. Like I never see this kind of beautiful facilities, you know, instructions and everything. So I want to experience that. But if you just learn online, you may just learn the knowledge from the textbook other than that.
You wanted to experience it.
Right.
That's what you said. Those were your words. So we want experiences. We don't just want information. Information's easy. Yeah.
People need structure and like
being at a place or having that time blocked out in order to get things done or.
That is true. I mean, that is true. Yes, that is true. But I'm gonna, and I loved your response, but I'm gonna play off of Cindy's response here because that goes into what we're talking about today, about experiences, because I think that's true and that's what people want. And I have, I presented this before to some of you, so you might be familiar with it, that I think there's kind of these 3 C's are what constitute education and educational systems. We have content, the stuff we're learning, and I think the internet does that really well. We can't really compete with the internet as far as content learning goes. There's credentials, which is we give people feedback and we give them recognition for the things that they've learned. And we still kind of corner the market on that a little bit in universities, but I'm predicting, and you guys know this, that within the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see a big change that way too, because we're not the only people anymore that give credentials. And a lot of companies and nonprofits and other groups are giving credentials for skills now. So there's other groups that are going to be doing that. But what we can do at a university that I think kind of uniquely is we can provide mentored experiences because you have 2,000 specialized experts on this campus from several hundred different domains, and they're all within a 2-mile square radius. So we've got so many experts packed into this campus. And if we use their expertise to give mentoring and provide mentored experiences and provide community, that's what I think will be the difference at universities. You'll come to the university to have mentored experiences with experts from different domains. And I think that'll be kind of the future. So along with this, there's also another problem going on, which is the skills gap. Maybe you've heard about this. 80% of Americans agree that there is a skills gap, and it's affecting them personally. Employers are saying there's a skills gap between what people think they know and what they can actually do on the job. And one of the best ways to actually bridge that gap, to actually learn for a career rather than just learn from a textbook, is to practice in school what you will actually do on the job, to actually not just learn about it, but practice it. And that leads me to what I think the solution is, which is experiential learning, learning by doing, which is what we did as kids, what we still want to do as college students. So experiential learning, experiential education is when educators purposefully engage with learners in direct experience and then focused reflection in order to increase their knowledge, develop their skills, clarify their values, develop people's capacity to contribute to their communities. So there are actually 4 types of methodologies related to experiential learning. This comes from a guy named Jay Roberts. He came and presented with me here at BYU a few years back. And there's kind of these 4 different methodologies. So there's active learning, which is you're in a classroom, you're doing kind of the regular stuff in classrooms, but you do it in an active way. And then there's project-based learning, which takes it to another degree. And I'm going to talk about what project-based learning is particularly. There's community-based learning when you get out of the classroom and go learn in the communities. And I think our project did a little bit of both of those things. We were doing project-based learning, but we were doing it in sitio, in the community, and in this case, the community of Peru. So we were getting outside of the classroom to actually do it. And then there's work-based learning, of course, too, which is also another type of experiential learning. So our project really did these 2 things right here and tried to do a project out in the community. So what is project-based learning? PBL, sometimes it's called PJBL, to distinguish it from problem-based learning. It's a teaching method in which students learn by actively engaging in real-world and personally meaningful project. In fact, it was really interesting, this project that we did down in Peru, how personally meaningful it really was to people. Stephanie Sorensen is hoping to do if you don't mind me saying so, she's hoping to do a mission as a BYU Pathway missionary. It's something that her and her husband had already talked about. And so this was exciting for her. We had Jenna Hatch, who works with BYU Pathway graduates over in the English Language Center. And then we had a former BYU Pathway alumni who was actually on our team too. So it was very personally meaningful to a lot of us on that team. And I want to first distinguish for you guys the difference between they would call dessert PJBL and main course PJBL. Because we'll see a little bit of both of these. Dessert PJBL is when you do projects in the classroom, which if some of you have taken my 420 class from the undergraduate minor, but in that class, it's a normal class. We do discussions, we do lecture, we do all sorts of things. And we have 4 projects that you work on in that class. But it's part of the class. The main course PJBL is when the whole class becomes the project. It's not just something you add on to the class, it is the class. And that was what we were going for here. A little bit of the difference here. It's not just an add-on, but it's integrated where every single assignment, in fact, that's the way we did. You start with the project. So what I did as an instructor was negotiate the project first, and our client was BYU Pathway. So to understand what it was that BYU Pathway needed. And then after I talked to BYU Pathway and after I decided the boundaries of this project, then I created the assignments for the class. And so it's a little bit backward. You don't create the assignments first, you create the assignments after you decide on the project. In fact, my project-based class that I'm doing right now is an undergrad evaluation class, and I just finalized the project yesterday. So the assignments are still being developed in that class, and they've been working already on some things, but I'm now able to finish out the assignments for the rest of the semester because I had to figure out the project first and then develop the assignments. And it has to be real-world context and application. And it has to be sharing beyond just the classroom. This isn't something that you're just doing for class. You're doing this for the world. And you have a public audience for this kind of entree-based, project-based learning. So that was all a bunch of just talking at you to kind of set, because you guys are graduate students in IP&T, to set the theoretical foundation for what we were trying to do. This wasn't just because we wanted to go to Peru. This was following a strategy, it was following a method. For the learning of the students, as well as what we were hoping to accomplish for the people in Peru. And what I'm going to do now is show you some videos, one video to kind of show what we did. But let me first just set it up. We had 8 students, 4 of them, 5, that were IPT students. I get confused because Lily was transitioning. She had just barely finished undergrad, was just rolling into our graduate program. So, but I'm going to call you an undergrad. I think that's the way I thought about it. So we had 4 graduate students, 4 undergraduate students, 4 different nationalities, 5 different disciplines on campus. So this was very diverse. Most of the students had never met each other before. And we took this group of 8 students and we had a class where I taught them evaluation for about 5 weeks. And then after that, that was all they got. Then we went down to Peru, and in 2 weeks, they collected data from a couple hundred people, analyzed the data, and wrote a 30-page report in 2 weeks, and went to Machu Picchu. So I mean, they had some, but they did a lot of work. And the typical schedule was wake up in the morning, usually sleeping in a little bit because we were up late the night before, and then we would go and analyze the data from the night before until about noon, and then we would go play until about 4 p.m. And then we go collect more data, and that was the process: collect, sleep, analyze, collect, and play in the middle. So that was what we did. And here's a video that kind of shows the experience of what we were doing down there.
So Peru is one of the leading countries in pathway program enrollment in the Andean region, but growth rate has slowed down. So Dr. West and our team, we came down to Peru to find out why.
Put together an education fair. They've got all these different schools available. They're really pushing for the members of the church to be able to learn about higher education. They were thrilled that BYU Pathway could be part of this education fair, and we've been slammed for a couple hours, nonstop, people wanting to know about BYU Pathway, and we're excited to be able to tell them more about it.
The project that we're working on here in Peru is an evaluation project with BYU Pathway.
Something key that we're doing here is that we're collecting data from the users of Pathway and those prospective users as well to understand how the program can be better improved.
Ahora estoy trabajando como cajero, bueno, as a cashier, okay. Y llevo ya 5 meses.
Entonces mi esposo me habló del programa de Pathway. Él ya había llevado Pathway un tiempo atrás y me dijo, estudia, tú puedes estar ahí.
There's an obvious enthusiasm for education. People have showed up in great numbers. They're eager to learn. And I think that better understanding where they're coming from, what their concerns are, what the challenges are, and the things that they love about the program as well, can help it to be shaped even better for their success in the future.
Creo que con la visita que hemos tenido va a ser un impacto grande, va a mejorar sobre todo se ha abierto algunas brechas que había entre el desconocimiento. Pathway ha sido diseñado, creo que para bendecirnos y progresar nosotros aquí, en esta parte de Sion.
It was amazing to sit in that very first session and to watch the students working together and meeting one-on-one with individuals and asking questions and hearing the answers. And I would just fly like a butterfly from room to room just to hear what the discussion was about. And I was just thrilled by that, because all of a sudden I could see that we were going to start to develop some good data for the area.
Uno de los mayores beneficios que nos da es poder dominar otro idioma.
Y también que te aprendes aprendes más capacidades para, por ejemplo, tener contactos, llevas bien con los instructores y pues otras plataformas que tú puedes acceder gracias a BYU.
I think what I like most about the project is being able to interact with everyone here and see how the BYU Pathway program is really changing lives. There's so many people who have told us about their stories about how their situations have been improved because they have been able to get higher education, and I think that's really special. It really proves that this is an inspired program by the church.
So if you want to come with us, you're welcome to.
I've always been intrigued by the idea of Pathway. I think it's a really cool program, especially as an English teacher to international students. Many of my students do Pathway before they come, and so being able to understand the program better and have more empathy for the experience that they go through really helps me to be a better teacher.
Creemos que realmente va a ayudar, porque sentir que nos prestan atención y que realmente quieren saber cómo es que nosotros aprendemos el Pathway es importante para nosotros. Esto significa mucho para cada uno de los estudiantes.
¿Qué impactos si hay alguno ha tenido BYU Pathway en su
One of the focus
situación?
groups we did was with some current BYU Pathway students, and there was one student in particular who said that what he's found is that once people realize that they are a child of God, that helps them see that they do have the capability to learn and to grow. And he said, I wish that more people would know that they can do BYU Pathway, even though it might seem a little bit intimidating at first. That's been something where I've really come to appreciate people's stories and how it connects them together, and how we all have our own stories and we can share them with others.
It makes me very hopeful for the effect that Pathway can have both for all of the people in Peru, but also the effect it can have for each individual who has the opportunity to participate in it.
So that was a little video about our experience. Some of you might know Rodrigo. He is a student that works on video projects for the department. He's the one that put this together for us. So we're grateful for that.
Got a car key there. Okay.
Okay. So what did we learn about experience? I'd like to have the students now kind of share some of their learnings. So project-based learning, it's a type of teaching strategy, it's a type of learning strategy. Has its pros and cons. It's not easy to do necessarily. In fact, I think the participants will tell you this was a ton of work, a lot of work. So, but let's have them talk a little bit about what they learned from the experience. Sarah, if you could mute them, yeah. So, all right. I think this is this you, Steph?
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've read this slide. We gave this presentation a while back for the dean's office, but I think so. The main part for this, like, it was.
Yeah, when you are ready.
It was also a really difficult experience. We all came together and all of us had different skills. Like Rick kind of talked about the diversity of our group. I was probably the weakest in the Spanish, although I was enough to be able to do the work, but I also had evaluation skills that others hadn't had. And so each of us kind of came together, which is really cool to see that in a team. And it felt like a real world experience because we had different people with different experiences that were coming together for this purpose. So, we really did have to rely on one another. Also, I just felt like a lot of the focus of this was to kind of consider what does it mean to belong right? To a group or to as a part of BYU. And I think that our sense of belonging, as well as that, right, like the deep learning that we had from that actually being immersed in this project, as well as our growth, came from the opportunity that we had to be able to address a challenge that was really an authentic problem and a meaningful problem. Like it had, like the report that we had was really going to be used. It wasn't just going to be given to our teacher and evaluated.
I think it got read within 24 hours. Like they were anxious for the report. So
Yeah. So it was super meaningful to us to realize this it has high risk for us and high rewards for the project we were doing. And also the expectation and confidence that others had that we could do this. Like I felt that, I'm assuming everyone else did, but I don't know, in our class. But even though I felt at the time, at times, like my Spanish skills were not up to par for being able to do this. And even some of the evaluation skills, the complete confidence that both Rick as well as Paul, who is our contact with BYU Pathway, like they had complete confidence that we could do this, which was really meaningful for me and gave me the confidence to feel like, oh, we're gonna be fine. We will be okay with this. So like we were not just students to them, but we were working on this project. So I really feel like this kind of experience just can't easily happen in a classroom. You need to be out and working on a project like that.
thank you. And one of the things I want to do today is talk not just about what we did improve, but like talk about how would you do experiential learning like this? And I think Stephanie brought up something. As a teacher, I've heard sometimes people say, it looks like the teacher's not doing anything. When I first came here to BYU, I did research on this kind of teaching. And I was studying the Center for Animation here at BYU, which if you know anything about the Center for Animation, they, hey, Brian, they win the Student Emmy every year for the best animated film in the country. And the only time that they take second is when they actually submit 2 videos and they have to take second to themselves. That's the only time that they take second. They win every single time. They're the best animation program in the country. And I remember going to watch them to see, well, what makes them so good? And I'm watching as the teacher sat in the back of the room the entire time on his laptop. And I thought, he's not even teaching. This is weird. But then as I studied them, I came to realize he was doing quite a bit of teaching, but it was behind the scenes. So it's not the visible stand up in front of everybody like I'm doing right now. It's a behind the scenes kind of teaching. It's one-on-one with people as they struggle with how do I do my part on this team and things like that. And so what Stephanie's talking about in terms of being able to just communicate confidence, I have found that that's probably one of the main skills that you have to have as a teacher to do this kind of thing. Is every semester, I've had this conversation with Peter, who teaches this way too. Every semester and in the middle of it, I think this is a mess. I don't know how this is going to work, but it always does. And I have to pretend to think, I have to be completely positive and confident the entire time because the students do build off of that. And if I'm confident, then they'll be confident and it'll end up working out and it'll be just fine. So, and it's done that every year. It's been good. So
It didn't feel messy at all for us. No.
and it did for me because
I'm joking.
it did for me because I was running around talking to students. It made me feel messy for you too, but I knew it was going to work out and it did. All right, who was this presenting? Is this you, Lily?
Yeah. All right. I'm not going to read this. You can just read it if you want to. But my main takeaway of the evaluation thing, we actually talked about it in one of our classes during that spring term. Paul Pickett, who is the BYU Pathway representative, I think one of the first days we met him, actually, he said, when you're doing these interviews, go by the spirit. We'll have questions come to your mind that you didn't even write down beforehand. Head in that direction, you're going to get better results because you're going to start getting people's stories. You're going to hear their experiences, and the spirit might prompt you in a certain direction that you weren't planning on heading. That will change the results. And so that is literally what happened. In every single interview, we had all these many questions. We didn't even get through all of them sometimes, but you would ask some questions and then you would start seeing that people would start trusting you, especially because at the beginning of the focus groups, we would tell people, don't just tell us what you think you want us to hear. We want to actually help you, and not just help you, but help the whole BYU Pathway experience and improve this education across the world. And so we're trying to find the problems and the pain points and also what is working. So be honest with us and tell us that. And so then they did. And once we gained their trust, then we were able to actually hear their stories. So there were many times where I would just be sitting in a focus group and then we would be asking questions and then I would have pop into my mind a certain question and then we would go for it and ask it. And then you would get people's stories and even their testimonies, which was the coolest part. And there were many times where people would tear up and us about how much pursuing this education has changed their life and how much it's changing their family's life. And now they want to help other people do it. And they see all these benefits. And they said, it's also hard. And the hard is what makes it work. That struggle is what fuels them to keep doing it. And so that's one of the main things I took away from it.
Thank you, Lily. Okay. Is this you, Stephanie?
Yeah, and I am gonna read it because I wrote it a long time ago. I'll elaborate. I learned that evaluation is best done as a team, and Stephanie alluded to this too, the other Stephanie. We each had strengths and weaknesses that we brought to the process. Some connected easily with the participants or had greater ease of language. Others helped lead the group through changing needs. Others brought organizational skills, and some were skilled at recognizing trends in the data we were collecting, while others were gifted with the ability to envision solutions. Overall, by cooperating with each other, we created a far better evaluation than one or two of us could have done on our own. And I would just add that in addition to that, I think that that was part of the confidence that Stephanie talked about, is that we recognized that we were all very willing to help each other with the parts we weren't great at. So there were lots of times when I would be working on something and I would get up and I'd go over to Brian or to Rodrigo and I'd say, I can't figure out what this is talking about. They would help me. And I knew, and there were other times Lily and Stephanie were very gifted about like organizing the themes and figuring that out. And so it allowed me to focus on other things that were more my strengths, have trust in them. So we trusted each other as well as feeling trusted by those who were expecting quality work from us. And that teamwork, I think, was just a really key piece of the evaluation process.
Thank you. Okay. And then Brian, I don't have a slide for you, but do you have any, maybe what did you learn academically? We're going to talk later about what we learned about belonging, but how was this learning experience different for you and maybe than other kinds of learning experiences you had?
I'll just stand over here.
Brian is a journalism major here.
Yeah, so I have a minor in design thinking. So academically, I think it exposed me to I think it's a different approach completely to what we do in journalism, which report on things. But this idea that, there was a problem that we were trying to understand and just try to see what the data that comes from the people, what they needed done. And I think one of the biggest things from this was that just by going down there, people felt seen because they were like, these people from BYU came all the way down here and they showed up in dozens of people. It was like big groups, more than we expected, because we came from all the way from BYU to do this evaluation. So I think inherently they felt seen that way. But then, as Lily also mentioned, when we were having these conversations, we were able to help them feel heard, help them feel like whatever they were going to tell us, we actually were going to do something with it, and not just we'll go away and then this is it, that they could be collaborators and partners with us in improving this program. I think that was the biggest thing, that we're working with the people, but they're also they're an essential part of this process in helping us come up with solutions. And I think you just broaden the scope of personally just having a different toolkit when approaching journalism and other situations. I just went on a different project with the journalism school where we kind of had to do like an evaluation. So I was pulling from the stuff that we learned to try to apply it to this journalism project that I was doing. So.
Thank you, Brian. Which I think brings up another point. Sometimes the question with experiential learning and project-based learning is teachers feel anxiety that students won't learn what they need to. And the reason why is because this kind of stuff takes a lot of time, which means you have less time in the classroom to cover everything. So you don't cover all the material that you would normally want to cover. You don't cover all the topics. And that can give teachers anxiety and say, well, they're not going to be as well prepared because they haven't learned everything. But I think what Brian's saying, you learn things that you can then apply to other projects. You learn actual skills that you can actually use in other projects. And they've done research on this, like how does experiential learning work? And I see that you want to say something about that too, but research says that it is better than traditional lecture-based teaching if you do it well, which every teaching method can be done poorly or well. But they find that in K-12 areas, at least, that students that do this kind of project-based learning outperform their peers in a more traditional kind of learning setting. And then their advanced placement pass rates are better, even though they may not cover everything that the test is going to cover. They do better on the test because they've had these experiences. And then Linda Darling Hammond is a famous researcher in education. She was a president of the American Educational Research Association. And she says, we know it works. This is the kind of learning that is going to propel students who have been further from opportunity forward at a more rapid rate than the other kinds of critical thinking and problem solving skills. Well, no, with the kinds of critical thinking and problem solving skills that they need. So even though you don't cover everything, you actually get more learning out of this kind of teaching strategy. And I know you wanted to say something, Ashley, and then maybe Stephanie as well. Yeah.
Mine was more about, or I guess a kind of problem-based learning. So one thing that I really took away from this was when we were in the class, like about evaluation, when we were like planning our evaluation, we had this idea, we'd only have about 5 people per focus group. It was going to be amazing. And then we get there and then it was crazy. It was just like 10, 15 people, leaders.
How many did
like
you have in your
over
focus group, Stephanie?
We had like about 40 people.
They had 40. We're not supposed to work with 40 people, but they had traveled 2 hours to come, so we weren't going to turn them away.
So we had like in the moment we were like, okay, how do we talk to people? We talk to them beforehand, going up and interview people before the meeting started, and then pulling people aside afterwards and like doing the focus groups a little bit better. How do we incorporate 40 people in a quote unquote focus group with all of our questions? So there was a lot of like having to think on our feet and be flexible that you don't get in a laboratory sterilized setting, that I think doing like problem-based learning in real life teaches you those skills and helps you be more adaptable, and really like not just material and content skills, but these are like intangible, like soft skills that you really do need in a workplace.
Do you have something to add to that, Stephanie? Thank you, Ashley. That was good.
Yeah, it really goes along with what Ashley was saying, but I was just thinking about the power of failure in especially an experiential learning environment because it's so authentic, but it causes you to have to address it in that moment. Like the planning that we had, things were very different than what we had planned. And yet those failures, we were able to address it as a team, and be able to actually turn those around to be benefits in the program. But
one of our failures, we had a plan for rapid transcription that we thought was going to work so that we could have English transcripts of everything, and it didn't work at all. And so then we had to adjust and like change the way we were doing our, analysis of the interviews afterwards and stuff like that. So yeah, we had to think on our feet, which is the way the real world is, right? That's the way real world activity is. I'd like to pause here just a minute and just ask any questions or thoughts about questions or just thoughts and reflections you're having about experiential learning and how we can maybe design for this as instructional designers. Yeah, Katie.
I'm curious more about what your findings were. So the original problem was that Pathway had stopped spreading. So like, what did you find? Why was that the case? And what were some solutions?
So we have to be a little bit careful because one of the things we learned about evaluation is we don't own the data. The data is owned by BYU Pathway, right? It's proprietary to BYU Pathway. But I think we can say a few things. Like we learned, for example, that some of the ways that BYU Pathway is set up is difficult from people who English is not their second language. And even though we have English Connect to teach them English, it was a stumbling block to them. And so one of the recommendations is, and what I've heard is this is rolling out in BYU Pathway, is they are going to now start offering BYU Pathway in the native languages, which would be tremendously helpful to what we talked to the people down in Peru about. That was one thing. There were other things too that were just interesting cultural things, like things that you don't think would make sense that would trip people up, like paying for it, which for the one thing, it wasn't very expensive, right? Because BYU Pathway is cheap and there's scholarships and all that kind of thing. But in America, we pay for things on a semester basis. You pay your tuition, and then you can go to school for a semester. That's not the way it works in Peru. They pay by the month. And so even though it was not a high cost, and even though the per month rate, like if you think about it, you say, well, just save up a little bit each month and you'll have the amount to pay for the semester, it was still tricky for them. And that would be something that's like a structural thing, that's a cultural thing. They're just not used to paying by the semester. They don't understand what credit hours are. It doesn't work that way in South America. Scholarships, like we say, hey, you can get a scholarship. And they're like, can we? Because in Peru, you get promised scholarships that never materialize. And so, even though it's the church, they're just not used to scholarships actually working. And so it's things like that that are very cultural that you think, well, I told you there was a scholarship. And they're like, yeah, but scholarships don't work in Peru. And so we uncovered some of those cultural kinds of things that we were able to identify for BYU Pathway and say, here are some of the things that are tripping people up that maybe you just didn't think about. So things like that. Any other questions? Yeah, Pam.
I think it would have been meaningful if you had a bigger group.
Well, that's a good question.
A bigger group, how?
Like
More students. Would it have been as meaningful for all of you guys if we had 15 people? Originally, we were going to have 15. Originally.
We'd have more buses.
Thinking if that's the best way to learn, if more students wanted to learn that way, they have bigger classes, but would it diminish the impact?
So I think yes and no. I think there is some power in the group being small enough that everybody has a meaningful role to play. If you have 15 people, it'd be easy to say, I'm not meaningful to this project because everyone else will carry the load. And I'm not good at Spanish, like Stephanie's saying, or I'm not good at this, and I'm just going to sit back and not do my part. So I think it needs to be a small enough group that everybody feels meaningfully involved. But what I have done, I have taught this class with 20 people. And what I did is just had multiple projects and split people into groups so that they're manageable groups on each project. And that becomes tricky as a teacher too, because then I'm running around managing different groups with different clients, different evaluation questions that they're doing. And that is tricky, but I also think it works. And I've been able to scale it up to, 20 people. That's the biggest I've had to this point. So yeah, Stephanie.
I was just going to comment from my observation. I think it would have been very difficult for you to, especially at the beginning when there's such a learning curve and we were trying to figure things out. When we were doing our analysis sessions or trying to figure things out.
I was having to work one-on-one with a lot of people. Yeah.
Like we constantly had need for him. Like, what do we do about this? What do we do about this? Or whatever. So he was just like popping around all the time, dealing with our questions. Something we're waiting about, like, okay, what do I do with this data? He has to deal with that. So I think unless there were more people that were familiar with the skills needed to do the project, like if there were more mentors or assistants, then I think our group could have been bigger. But I think without that, it would have been a strain a little bit for the things that we were trying to get done on the deadline that we had and the assistance that we needed to get from what we knew to what we needed to know.
Yeah, and the Peru trip had a little bit of a challenge too, that a lot of people were in a country that they were unfamiliar with, and you could get people lost if you had too big of a group, But the other thing I've done sometimes when I do have big enough groups that I split them into smaller groups, having somebody be the project manager of that group. And then I train the project managers and like the questions to me get funneled through the project manager so that I can answer the questions that need to get answered and stuff like that. And the project manager serves as a TA almost for their teams. So that's something I've done when I've scaled it up a little bit. So other questions? Yeah.
How much do you think about your project reasonably paying between, I guess, the plan? Because obviously something like this takes quite a bit of planning versus the results.
So about a week ago, I went through to clean out some stuff and I threw away about 200 paper copies of some handouts that we thought we were going to use and we never did. So that might tell you something there. It's good to set a plan because the plan gets you closer. It gets you prepared so you can adjust in the moment. If we had not had a plan, I think it would have been a disaster. But we had a plan. And then when we got down there, we had to adjust because the groups were just too big. Like our original plan was we were going to be passing out these handouts to everyone in the focus group, having them write down their answers. And then as we're talking, we would collect that paper. So we had individual data from each person. Like we had these plans and the groups were just too big. And so we just had to change on the fly for it. And but if we had not had a plan originally, it would have been really hard to change. So I think you have to make a plan and then be willing to change that plan. So, yeah.
One thing I also wanted to bring out is it's something that comes out a lot in my work because I work with the BYU Arts Partnership Native American Curriculum Initiative. But this idea of reciprocity in partnership. So we were working in partnership with BYU Pathway, specifically Paul Pickett. And so he was super helpful for us as we were trying to get to know Peru and how to work with things. He gave us tips and things like that. And then there came a time in our experience there where they had planned an educational fair. That's what a lot of those images were from, where there were tons of people there. They had this educational fair and they
We were
had,
not really supposed to be there participating.
how many people did they have show up?
We had 800 people show up in a room about probably twice this size. And this room is slated for 50 people, fire code. And so, you know, a room slated for maybe 100, and they had 800 people come in and out over 3 hours to learn about education from different universities, but they were particularly interested in Perpetual Education Fund and BYU Pathway. Our two tables got really slammed.
Well, and it wasn't part of our plan. We weren't supposed to be talking at this educational fair. It was going to be just Paul talking at the fair at the table. But when he found out there were 800 people, he's like, I need your help. Can you guys come help me? And we were happy to do so. It was a great experience for us, but it wasn't something that was part of our plan. But at the same time, like, not only was he able to help us, we were able to help him, and we were able to do it in a way that met different needs
It
throughout.
really didn't have anything to do with evaluation, but we were there as a partnership. And so he needed us and we pitched in to help. And he basically just handed us his PowerPoint. He says, here's the talking points, good luck. And we were selling BYU Pathway to these folks. And they were asking us questions about, well, how does this work? And how do you sign up for this? And how do you get the scholarship? And I think half the answers we gave were probably not true. And we were just, we were doing our best to just try to explain to them. And then we later like, Paul, I told them this. He's like, well, that's not right. I'm like, oh, you know. But doing the best we can to help these people learn about BYU Pathway and be ready for it. And so, yeah.
So online education is kind of my thing. And I'm curious how you envision something like this playing out in an online course.
The BYU Pathway part or the us?
No, yeah, like, yeah, project-based learning in general, like this type of a scenario, how do you see that playing out in online education? And obviously I could give you more specific stuff because we could talk about synchronous versus asynchronous, but
I mean, I've done a lot of research into online learning. I'm a proponent of online learning, but I think we also have to be honest that online learning doesn't do everything as well as in-person learning does. Now, sometimes we have to do online learning because people don't live near a university. They don't, there's practical reasons for it. But I think realistically, we have to also recognize that it can't do this as well as being in person. And I think it was Stephanie or Lily, maybe someone it was being with them, hearing their stories. And you can collect that data over Zoom. Those of you who have done that know it's just not the same. The human connection, there's videos, you're going to see a video here in a minute of Stephanie hugging people after the interview's over. You know, they've had these like emotionally bonding experiences where they've poured their hearts out about their situation, about education. And then, she was almost there just bonding with them and developing these relationships. And that's just really hard to do online. Now, that being said, I have a client right now for my undergraduate class that's in Australia. So we're not taking the students to Australia. But we are working with that client through Zoom. And then I think but the important thing to emphasize is even though the team might be dispersed, maybe the client is at a distance, that you are getting out and doing things in the real world, even if it's your community here, which is what we're going to do. So we're doing this evaluation for Australia. And I said, we can interview people over Zoom if you want us to interview people that are Australian, or we can go do interviews here in Utah with people here in Utah. And they said, just do that. So we're going to get out of the classroom. We're going to go do the work here in Utah, but for a client in Australia. So you can kind of work that way sometimes where you say you are distributed locationally, but in your locations, go do real work in the real world, what I would say. Stephanie Allen, did you have your comment too?
Comment about the being in person. They might say to you, it's really difficult to get to my class via Zoom. And you're like, okay. And then you go try their public transportation system. And then you're like, oh, it's really difficult to get to, so the experience of walking literally in their shoes or being on the roads and the trails where they are.
Actually, that is so true.
Changes your perspective and your
so true.
Doors.
So true. Because that was one of the big hurdles in Lima particularly. It literally takes an hour and a half to get to the Stake Center. So you sit in Salt Lake City and you say, ooh, BYU Pathway, English Connect. You can go learn in your stake centers. You can learn English in your stake centers. And we talk to people, they're like, I just can't do it. It takes an hour and a half to get there. And we experienced that because we would have to leave at 4 o'clock to get there to do our interviews. And we'd sit in the freaking car for 2 hours. And so we empathized with them. We understood what they were talking about. And so, yeah, walking in their shoes with them is I think, really true, Stephanie. Thank you. What I'd like to do now is just skip ahead a little bit. We've been talking about some of the challenges of experiential learning. You've been asking questions. I've been sharing maybe some strategies for how to overcome those challenges. But I want to get to this, which is that collaborative experiences like this, collaborative experiential learning, not only teaches you about evaluation, about the academic skills, but it really creates community and unity and belonging on the team. And this team really came together. In fact, what I've heard is that they created a WhatsApp group called The Kids, because on the trip, there were the adults and the kids, and they created a group called The Kids. And they did lots of things that they didn't tell me about until after they came home.
You know that.
Like eat street food, you know.
The adults.
Are you one of the adults? And you know, they still get together and chat with each other. They really formed a team. And you saw they came together today, and they're here today supporting me. They're just great. And we have one last video that we're going to watch about belonging and how this kind of experience can bring us together in belonging. Ah, shoot. This just barely got uploaded. I might have to pull up my computer because I think it's that I have to log in. What up here? This video literally got done about a half an hour.
Nice to help you stop.
Let's see here.
Not singing and dancing. Because this was so well received and because there's so many of us who are really interested in these messy real world problems, Peter is helping me, newbie, to work on a course series actually for next semester and then spring term. So I just want to share this idea with you. Would be particularly useful probably for second year master's students and PhD students, but we also are fine with first years. The plan would be to have a 664 sequence partnered with an undergrad. So similar to the current 664, where you have a graduate class and an undergraduate for a semester. I'll tell you about what we're doing there. And then bolted on to a cultural complications or cultural complexities course in spring term, which hopefully would involve kind of experience on the ground. So developing teacher training for a particular audience in a particular setting. In this case, probably Central Africa with my former group from Eden School. And then spring term would be taking that and then iterating for maybe different audiences in different parts of the world, potentially, hopefully within an immersive experience. So if you're interested, we're gonna get our act together and get some money, we hope, and then we'd love to have you come. But come and talk to me anytime about it.
All right, sorry to be running a little bit late, but here's a second video that Rodrigo put together, particularly on this idea of community and belonging. I actually haven't seen this myself. This is the first time.
Caleb, prayer. My name is Jenna Smith. My name is Ashley Salazar-Schumacher.
Okay, my name is Brian Barba. I'm a journalistic student with a design thinking minor.
I am a graduate student in the Instructional Psychology and Technology department.
I'm a master's student in instructional psychology and technology.
I'm a doctoral student at BYU's Department of Instructional Psychology and Technology.
The project that we're working on here in Peru is an evaluation project with BYU Pathway.
So the purpose of this trip is to provide an experiential learning opportunity for the students in both the IP&T graduate program as well as the design thinking interdisciplinary minor. We wanted the students to be able to learn more about how to do evaluation in multicultural settings, but also to do it in a way that was actually providing good and helpful service to a client.
We're hoping to find out why BYU Pathway hasn't been able to increase its enrollment and maintain the increase it's seen over the last few years.
We've been finding many interesting things about why people do or do not participate in BYU Pathway. Sometimes it's related to family kinds of situations or personal situations. Sometimes it's related to things that are very fixable. such as a lack of communication or marketing about the pathway program, people not understanding how to get started, or perhaps not feeling like they have the confidence that they could be a successful student in higher education.
I'm really looking forward to see what the results are, to see what we can do better at BYU Pathway to be able to provide for the individuals here, the ability to learn more about what we're offering, and also for us to learn what they need so that we can offer what they need.
Something very meaningful to me when interacting with the members here is to see how excited they get when we come to these meetings and engage with them, because we're coming all the way from Utah, from BYU, and they just get excited. And I think you can see that their faces light up and they feel valued.
Creo que con la visita que hemos tenido va a ser un impacto grande, va a mejorar, sobre todo se ha abierto algunas brechas que había entre el desconocimiento. Pathway ha sido diseñado, creo que para bendecirnos y progresar nosotros aquí, en esta parte de Sion.
I was so impressed seeing the people of Peru come at the very end of a long day and come together to learn about BYU Pathway, the passion that they had, the faith that they exemplified, and the ways that they came together as a community was just beautiful. And it makes me very hopeful for the effect that Pathway can have both for all of the people in Peru, but also the effect it can have for each individual who has the opportunity to participate in it.
As we met with them and they were each sharing their stories, each one of them was saying how they got into the program, what their challenges were, how they've overcome those challenges, all those things. I honestly, I felt overcome with the spirit because I was so proud of them. They were working so hard for the goals that they had. And I could just feel how much Heavenly Father loved them, that He was proud of them. And I just sincerely wanted the very best for them. So I got a little bit emotional at the end. And I felt like even just spending that 30, 40 minutes together made us fast friends.
Todos estos pueblos jóvenes que vienen. Esto va a cambiar la educación de futuras generaciones.
Maybe that's just, I might have to just stop it there because unfortunately I have to go teach in the library right now. So, but thank you all for coming today. We're happy to answer questions that you got later. It was a great experience. And like Stephanie Allen is saying, but we won't be able to replicate what we did exactly in Peru, but we're hoping to have more experiences like this for you. And they're hard work. That's things you need to know about as a teacher. It's hard to do. As students, it's hard, but also really rewarding.
Thank you so much. And wow, if all of you who participated can stay, we'd love to have you join us for lunch and spread out and we'll, all of us could ask you questions. That'd be great. Dolly, let's see, would you pray for us? Yeah, we're